There are a lot of debates throughout Star Wars Legends media about the proper use of Force powers. This sometimes involves debating the nature of the light side versus the dark side, and what the role of the Jedi should be within the galaxy, but today we're going to talk about the personal and physical consequences of simply using too much Force juice. It's not necessarily about how you use it, because sometimes it could be quite literally bad for your health. The personal or philosophical side of this mostly gets brought up with respect to how much and how trivially Luke ends up using the Force in some of the earlier Legends books especially. So this is a storyline that kind of built in the background between the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn in 1992 until it gets called out directly in the Hand of Thrawn duology in 1998, though elements still get referenced later on and a lot of the consequences of this are pretty far-reaching. It's commented on in the interim as well between Hand of Thrawn and the original Thrawn trilogy, but it's really the Hand of Thrawn duology that explicitly puts it all in one argument. But basically, there's an extent to which a lot of the novels in this period show Luke's growing mastery of the Force simply by having him do a bunch of random mundane tasks using the Force, and he's accomplishing some truly trivial things with it. For example, in the Black Fleet Crisis, rather than sitting on a chair like a normal person, he just starts whipping up cushions of air to sit on. It basically becomes like the Simpsons episode where Homer ends up owning a church and then praying for random household chores to be done.
Homer, God isn't some kind of holy concierge. You can't keep bugging him for every little thing.
Can and will.
The plots of several books end up getting propelled or even concluded by more and more extreme examples of Force power usage. The Jedi Academy trilogy by Kevin J. Anderson in particular has a lot of this, with Kip Duran pulling the Suncrusher superweapon out of the depths of Yavin, or in Darksaber, also by Kevin J. Anderson, where an entire fleet of Star Destroyers is just blasted away from Yavin by the students at Luke's academy. In-universe, we know Yoda said size matters not, so a lot of this can make sense within the context of what the Force is supposed to just be able to do. But out of universe, it can make it difficult to establish a situation that Luke can't just solve by running in with his lightsaber on and his Force reclining chairs blasting. The Hand of Thrawn duology starts addressing the potential harm and costs of this pretty early on, with Han acting wary of Luke and his use of the Force. Luke and Han are involved in negotiations between two member species of the New Republic, the Ashori and the Diamala, who are in the middle of a dispute about trade security. The details of that dispute aren't super important here, but when Luke talks about tracking Han's progress through an area, physically using the Force, Han becomes apprehensive and asks to clarify that Luke just means his physical location, and not a further delve into what he's thinking. Luke also suspects that Han is afraid Luke would try to solve the situation by reading the minds of the delegations to try to root out the real issues, something Luke does in fact consider doing. After a bit more pressing, Han tells Luke that part of his apprehension came from the Diamala's own fears about Luke, which Han thought might impact the negotiations. The Diamala weren't big fans of Luke in particular, because they believed that Jedi who used as much power as Luke did and as freely as Luke did always go dark. And when Luke asked Han if he felt that way too, Han admitted he did worry about that sometimes. This became a major through line for Luke in both books of the Hand of Thrawn duology, which is impressive because they're both very long books, though it's ultimately Mara Jade rather than Han, with whom Luke finally comes to the conclusion about what his issues have been. Mara blames the events of the Dark Empire comics, where Luke willingly goes over to the Empire to serve Emperor Palpatine, trying to bring down the Empire from the inside. She alleges that everything Luke had done since then had been tinged by the dark side in some way, and that the reason he finally felt like he was on the right path now was because he'd made a conscious decision to limit the use of his power. Essentially, in her estimation, Luke's massive use of power went hand in hand with his feeling that he was responsible for the choices and actions of everyone else, along with their consequences, which was necessarily going to put Luke on a dark path. And while his brush with the dark side in Dark Empire was a major factor in this, it wasn't just about the fact that Luke had dabbled in the dark side either. It was because when tapping into power, Luke essentially drowned out the real will of the Force. According to Mara, it was, quote, pretty obvious, isn't it, once you see it. The Force isn't just about power like most non-Jedi think, it's also about guidance. Everything from those impressive future visions to the more subtle real-time warnings I sometimes think of as a danger sense. Trouble is, the more you tap into it for raw power, the less you're able to hear its guidance over the noise of your own activity, pushing you to like this video and subscribe for more. I may have added that last part. But this conception of the Force and the limits it should place on the practical use of power are something we see the consequences of throughout the rest of Legends. In Legacy of the Force, when Jacen Solo is starting to become a Sith Lord, we see a lot less of him simply listening to the Force like he might once have done. Instead, he's more actively trying to use and affect the Force, and there's also an element where he starts to hide from the Force a bit more when he's trying to protect the identities of Alana and Tenel Ka as the people he truly loves from the Dark Lady of the Sith, Lumaya. This isn't explicit in the text, but I feel like that probably has an impact on his ability to get guidance from the Force as well. But the fall of Jacen Solo and all the problems around it is a very different video. He takes a 5-year sabbatical to learn about other Force traditions between the Yuuzhan Vong War and the Dark Nest Crisis, and even in that period, about 10 years before he becomes Darth Caedus, he draws criticism from members of other Force traditions like Akana of the Fallen Asi monks for trying to impact what they call the current, rather than simply listening to it, a criticism that Akana leveled against Luke in the aforementioned Black Fleet Crisis novels as well. Legacy of the Force in many ways tries to retell the story of the prequels and the fall of Anakin through Jacen. So much like how Palpatine wants Anakin appointed to the Jedi Council, Chief of State Cal Omas and Admiral Cha Niathal, a political ally of Jacen's, push for his appointment to the Jedi Council in the book Exile by Aaron Alston. They argue he deserves to be a master since he's clearly so powerful, but problematic King and Jedi Master Kip Durin references his own earlier actions in the Jedi Academy trilogy here, pulling the Sun Crusher out of Yavin, saying, quote, "When I was still a teenager, I was able to reach into the gravity well of a gas giant and pull a spacecraft out of it. That's something not many masters could accomplish. I could do it because I was strong in the Force, and because I had absolute faith in my right, my need to use that craft for a specific purpose. But I doubt I could do it today. I'm no weaker in the Force, and I'm a lot more skilled. But today I'd know that my intended purpose was not a good one, and my knowledge would deny me the focus I needed to perform that task. So was I a master then, or am I a master now?" Aaron Alston tends to be more in the Timothy Zahn camp when it comes to some of the broader themes of Star Wars, so I think he was pretty intentionally referencing some of what Timothy Zahn had developed with the Force in the Hand of Thrawn duology. You can at least see some of the similarities in the ideas that they're approaching between the dialogue that Mara has with Luke and what Kip says here. Mastery isn't just about being able to do more and more with the Force, it's about knowing when it is or isn't appropriate to do anything with the Force, and knowing when you should just kind of sit back and take that guidance. But at the start of the video, I also mentioned that using the Force too much could be bad for your health, so let's get back to that. For possibly the biggest example of this, when the Jedi students on Yavin that I mentioned earlier use their Force powers to toss away an invading fleet, it's done using one student, Dorsk 81, as a conduit through whom all that Force potential is being channeled. But channeling that much Force energy completely burns through his body. This happened before the prequels were released, but in the scene in Palpatine's office showing how he became the wrinkly guy we know in the original trilogy, this then got interpreted as essentially the same kind of thing. In The Dark Nest Crisis by Troy Denning, which was released alongside Revenge of the Sith, Luke starts experiencing the physical cost of using particularly strenuous Force powers. Here's one example from a situation where Luke was trying to sustain an illusion of a ship. Quote, "Luke continued the illusion's gentle turn, keeping it well ahead of its attackers and drawing them farther away. His skin felt dry and papery, and waves of heat were rolling through his body as the cytoplasm inside his cells began to boil. He did not let up. During the past year, he and Jacen had been working on overload techniques, so he knew he could endure the pain and fatigue almost indefinitely. His body would pay a steep price, aging a year in a matter of minutes, but he knew he would not collapse." Sometimes Denning even makes direct allusions between what Luke's doing and what Palpatine did, but Luke is consistently the character we see exerting that level of power, especially in Troy Denning's books. Denning was one of the 3 authors alongside Alston and Karen Traviss that contributed to the Legacy of the Force series, so sometimes it feels like a bit of thematic whiplash going from Denning to Alston's books, where there does feel to be a fairly different philosophy of what Force use is or means. But in Legacy of the Force Tempest, also by Denning, during a duel with the Dark Lady of the Sith, Lumaya, quote, "He, meaning Luke, was calling on the Force to keep fighting, drawing it through himself faster than his body could endure, literally boiling his own cells. At most, he had another minute of fight in him, maybe less," end quote. So ultimately, yes, using too much Force could be dangerous for a bunch of reasons. That's going to do it for today, though. Thank you for watching. Special thanks to the patrons and channel members whose support makes this channel possible. Let me know in the comments if there's another topic you'd like to see covered on the channel, and I hope to see you next time.